Well, I thought we'd discuss Lauren Southern's recent interview with Mary Harrington because there has been quite the contentious discussion about how it was received on the right. And I think there's a reason for this, and it's because lots of people, particularly I think of our age, Harrison, have come from homes which have suffered from the fraying of the social fabric and the breakup and alienation of their mother from their father. And so they want to rebuild from a broken frame of reference, a way to have a happy marriage, a happy family, children of their own, and something meaningful in their own life. And
which is a noble sentiment. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's completely non-objectionable. And they feel that this interview with Lauren, who is talking from her personal experience about the breakdown of her marriage and how she ended up being a single mother in a cabin in the Canadian woods, has attacked that. But I don't think that's the case. And so I want to, also having spoken to Mary and saying that this is not how she wanted it to be received, I wanted to discuss this, particularly with you two gents, because I thought you'd have a good take on it.
I think a lot of people have rightly been pointing out that Lauren Southern isn't a traditionally right-wing woman. She's a libertarian woman. And so libertarianism, being an offshoot of liberalism, had a bunch of liberal priors before going into, I guess, what you call the ideology of trad online.
Sort of, I mean, her Christianity should have mitigated a bit of that, you would think. However, I think that her understanding of Christianity, and she's admitted this, has also been in the listicle, I got it from a trad meme concept. And essentially what happens there is trying to copy or rote learn traditional gender roles or biblical gender roles or faith does not map onto human fallibility. And you might select the wrong person, and you might have personal failings, which is why you selected the wrong person. And so if you're trying to smash two meme conceptions of how men and women should behave together, it doesn't necessarily map onto the give and take that you have to do in real life.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, it's not that the people who want trad lives are wrong in any way.
Nope.
You know, it's a totally desirable thing to have, I know, because I have one. But it has to grow organically. And that's the issue.
Yes, and in most cases, and this is why it's so relevant what you say about the fraying of the social fabric. It is a learned behavior insofar as you are just enmeshed in an environment where it's taken for granted. And so I'm very fortunate in this respect. My parents have been married since 1996. I was born in 98, and I saw firsthand that marriage was both something to aspire to, but also crucially, not just something which you enjoy the superficial surfaces of it as delivered to you by the algorithm on TikTok because you've been watching some Andrew Tate videos, and then all of a sudden this pops up. It's also something that you need to work for, and it's something which requires sacrifice, and it's something which in cooperation and human messiness and learning more about the other, learning more about yourself, calling the other to virtue, encouraging the other to call you to virtue. It's a cooperative, messy, wonderful endeavor, and I'm lucky in that I've experienced that firsthand. So I've always, I must say, found the trad aesthetic as presented in its kind of glossy garment quite disturbing, because I know that it's naturally not like that. I mean, there are moments which are like that, but it's not fundamentally a pretty girl with her hair perfectly done, like churning butter in a meadow.
Onto reality.
It doesn't map onto reality, and people need to understand that these ideals are downstream of activities that people engage in. That they don't exist as mere propositional content, translated into an algorithm.
But also, it's the reason that people are looking for them, because and I think you're exactly right to hit that point as well. Because when it is in the position of propositional content that is served to you via the algorithm, the reason that you are drawn to it are essentially just consumer reasons. This is the aesthetic, this would be a nice and enjoyable thing. But that's not actually what you get out of a trad life. You don't get pleasure out of the trad life in the immediate consumer sense. What you get is satisfaction,
Very different.
which is something that can only happen over a long period of time, and it's not for the algorithm. Because as you say, there's a huge amount of human messiness in it.
Of course,
But at the end of that, or not even during it, again, I wouldn't put pictures of my house up, my living room up online, because it's always messy, right? Like you don't, because when you take the snapshot of that moment, that's what persists online. People go, oh wow, his house is messy. But you're not seeing the human love that's taking place that I would try to put across to you.
I don't want to make this too strong a statement because I don't think it's always true. I think it can be quite wholesome to want to put your children on Instagram and all that sort of thing. It can be. It can be. But it's also a massive green flag. So I'm not saying it's a red flag if a girlfriend or prospective girlfriend or prospective wife wants to have an Instagram, family Instagram of sorts. I'm not saying it's a red flag. But it's a massive green flag if they say they don't.
Yes, yeah. Quite. You have a sphere of life that is insulated from other people's opinion and commodification. Mary calls this the digital hijab, where basically you practice digital modesty.
Have a family group, and if you think, I want my family to see my children, just have a family group chat on WhatsApp. It's private, and then you can circulate these wonderful photos.
But I just to say, I have put kids up on my Instagram, and there is something to be said to show other families that no, we should be pacifying the internet, right? We should be making the internet family friendly, right? And so to say, well, no, the internet's this evil wild space that's just full of pornography and stalkers. Actually, it's not. It's actually really quite full of quite normal, wholesome people. And actually, I think there should be a place on the internet for families, And so, don't get me wrong, it has been one of these things in my mind where it's like, But I've said, no. Actually, I think I'm proud of the life I have, and I want people to be able to see that. It is important to be the example for others, and my Instagram's very family focused. I get lots of women on my Instagram being like, "Oh, such beautiful kids" and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and it's all very wholesome. So you are right that there is that aspect to it. I'm not trying to in any way discredit it, but also there is a consequence if we sort of silo ourselves away, because it's not.
Because most people won't.
Well,
most people won't anyway.
I think there's trade-offs with these things. So you need to raise the social desirability and the salience of having a family and its meaningful benefits, and what you can give and what you can receive, but also you can't ever control how that is received by people online. Yeah. And you don't want someone responding to a photo of your child in an untoward way without your knowledge.
Obviously.
Speaking of things that we have to do work to put in, I'm going to have to plug this before we start. This is if you have the prerequisite qualification to be a production manager and you're in the London area, commute to South East London, go check out the job page on our website. Now, for anyone confused as to what we're actually talking about, here was the interview Mary conducted with Lauren Southern. I'm going to give a little preface because I think we need to establish credibility here before we know that we can talk about this. The reason I wanted to bring this up is actually you did a really good video on this.
Thank you.
I've done the Twitter link because you don't get paid on YouTube because YouTube are awful. So go and look at it and watch it on Twitter. Mary watched this and she spoke to me about it and she said her quote here, and this is very important takeaway for everyone when they're listening to this. Carl nailed it when he talked about how it can be mostly his work and her work, but what matters is that it's just the work. So it's not about dividing it up according to what work you've seen in a study or according to an Instagram meme. It's about an organic, living,
unity,
flexible. Yeah, it's the definition of love is willing the good in the other, and so that means that you do trade-offs on the presumption that none of you are trying to exploit one another.
Yeah.
So that was good. We also spoke about Mary's work in Evil Origins of Feminism Part 2. Subscribe to the website. That was £5 a month to get all that condensed version. Essentially, we need to re-engender sexual solidarity, and there's a bit of the only way out is through. You need to be a continent man more than before you're a virtuous man, according to some Aristotelian formulation. So going trad is not bad, but it's not trad enough. It's performing the 1950s when it's like a representation of a small sliver of time.
The problem is with trad ideologies, it tends to look backwards rather than looks forwards. And so you are constantly comparing where you are now to somewhere that you've idealized in the past that you don't live up to. Whereas actually, if you were to look forwards, you'd be comparing where you are now to somewhere that you can achievably get to tomorrow or the day after. And actually, you will find yourself on a positive upswing in your own relationship rather than constantly being resentful and bitter about looking backwards at what you don't have.
What are truly wholesome, heterosexual relationships, if not a gamble on the future? Not like it's not an aping of past. Like, it's not supposed to be a pastiche of the past, as you say. Yeah. It's supposed to be generative and it's regenerative, and it's supposed to be forward-looking. And that a civilization is in decline. When there's an environment of antinatalism which clearly exists now, but there's a sense in which this excessive romanticization of past ideals and just dilute what would be the word, distilling them, but yes, distilling them into a pastiche which can give you clicks is also a harbinger of decline, I would say.
But there's no optimistic longing for the future. There's only an optimistic longing for the past to say, okay, well, there can actually be an optimistic view of the future, because the trads are not the trad people online. They're not wrong in wanting what they want, right? The at all, obviously, and they are generally right in the man should be the breadwinner. Obviously, and most women will tell you they think the man should be the breadwinner, and the woman should be the queen of domestic affairs.
Well, her primary concern should be the dependent children, but of course, women have always worked from the household for the household.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just flexible around childcare rather than making the career the primary thing that defines the woman.
Yeah,
at the expense of the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. But this, when it becomes abstracted into an ideology online, takes on a sort of hard boundary, which it just doesn't exist in the real world.
Yes.
Like, sometimes my wife's got a migraine or something because the kids have been screaming all day. I change the nappies and put them to bed because it needs to be done.
It doesn't make you less of a man for doing so.
No, of course not. Like, it just needs to be done. Goddamn,
yes.
Yeah. And she's like got this splitting headache. I totally understand. But then there are other days. I mean, she doesn't work obviously, but like when I've got things to do around the house that I need to do, that she'll do them because I'm just I'm having a terrible day or something like that, or whatever it is. And it can just literally be me just going like, look, darling, I'm just going to sit in my office this evening and just paint some miniatures and put some podcasts on or something. And she'll understand because, part of my responsibility is spending time with her and stuff like that. And so she'll understand this is not going to happen that day because I've had a bad day. And so, like, you've just got to be so much more flexible than talking about these things online would portray them to be in the real world.
Well, if I might say something on that, because it links to like this following link that I was going to mention, because I know people are going to be in the comments / in the chat or at the moment saying, there's no wonder that people are very risk averse and are gravitating towards hard boundaries because divorce courts and family law is rigged against men. I did do an interview with Jeff Younger, who I actually spent some time with in America, absolutely gentleman, who's been the ultimate case of his wife abducted his kids and is involuntarily transitioning them in California. And even he said, I don't want to jettison the institution of marriage just because it has been corrupted by modern law. But I have taken the time to actually investigate that. So go and watch that if you can. We're not going to go through it all here. But what that hinges on, that flexibility, that give and take, that willing to have defined roles, but there's a bit of a permeable barrier between it because of human fallibility or need, relies on trust. It relies on vulnerability. It relies on willing the good of the other without an expectation of the good returned to you, but a gratitude when it is.
It's not contractual.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people are trying to make it contractual, and I think they're trying to codify it into set boundaries of male and female traditional gender roles, which are desirable, but inflexible because they want the certainty of never being exploited again or it never breaking apart like they've seen their parents do.
And it's completely understandable when you see a case like this. It's completely understandable because, he's completely right. The way that the law deals with marriage now is just balmy.
It deliberately has an incentive to try and break them apart.
Absolutely.
And especially if you've grown up online.
And to punish the husband as well.
Quite.
So it's a because it begins in the feminist framework that assumes that the man is always somehow the aggressor in any kind of interaction between men and women.
But it is an understandable, but frankly, a complete logical error to say that because the incentive structure has been negatively calibrated over the last 50, the negative structure within which people pursue the good has been negatively calibrated in the last 60 years, that thereby invalidates the existence of any particular goods. Like, things can still be good, but harder to pursue.
Yeah.
And people acting in, like Connor and me, younger Zoomers acting in this space are going to have to ponder things in ways which my grandparents wouldn't have done, but it doesn't mean that striving towards that, albeit on altered terrain, more difficult terrain, is not a worthwhile endeavor.
And it doesn't mean that it's out of reach either, but what it means is you have to practice more discernment, because I think the desire for a more rigid contractual arrangement is out of the fear of uncertainty, because of the lack of understanding of the person that you're considering to be your future partner. You don't know them well enough.
Yes.
You don't trust them. You don't really love them enough. And it's something that I don't have the answers to, just to be clear. I'm not a Zoomer. I'm not struggling with these things.
You do learn on the job, and it is painful if relationships break down.
Yeah.
And I've had that, and that's been hence one of the reasons I've been investigating it. But in opening yourself up to the possibility of being vulnerable enough to be exploited, and you probably will be exploited, you'll eventually find someone that has the exact same fears but the same courage as you, and then the reciprocity becomes seamless. And it is a joy. Lauren didn't have that, and that's why Mary's talking to her, to try and act as a sort of warning to not LARP IRL and instead allow yourself to be more receptive and to have a more complete value structure that isn't as performative before going into relationships, so you don't select the wrong person.
Yes.
It's not to say that marriage and even the trad desires themselves are bad things.
No, they're totally
Yes,
understandable.
if your marriage certificate isn't, if your wife or your husband views your marriage certificate as a kind of accessory, then you've made a disastrous move.
Quite. Well, and it's important to say as well, about 3 weeks ago, Mary did an event at the Unheard Cafe about Tradwives, defending them against Sarah Dittam.
Yeah.
So Mary herself is on the side of the Tradwives writing this article when she was editing it. So it's not like it's coming from a malicious point.
I'm totally on the side of the trad wives and the trad husbands, or potential trad husbands. I think the impulse is completely correct. It's just you have to be realistic about how you're going to get there.
Being against false messiahs doesn't mean you're not on the side of the messiah.
Quite.
Yeah.
Good way of putting it.
There we go. Yeah. So Mary's background, if those that haven't read the article or Feminism Against Progress, is in her 20s, she was bandying about in lesbian communes and experimenting gender identities. And then her nan once just told her, "If you tried being normal, Mary." Exact quote. And then she got married, had a kid, and she stopped being a proper freedom feminist type. And now she's a reactionary.
That's the shortcut. The longer route is reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, but
just try being normal.
Be normal.
Yeah.
It's basically what Aristotle is going for.
Just a quick thing. I see this all the time where it's a woman in her 20s or 30s has been like, "Wow, if only I could have known that sleeping around in my 20s would make me an undesirable prospect for a marriage," or something like that. You know, some timeless piece of wisdom you could have just asked your nan about.
Yep.
And she would have been like, "No, you can't do that because men will think badly of you. So don't you dare do that."
Yeah.
And you would have known, and yet you've had to go this long, circuitous route and end up in a position where you're like, "Damn,
Yes.
I wish someone had told
And
me."
it's based on such a it's based on such, and I would apply it to men as well, but it is of course different. It is of course different. At the level of perception, it's slightly different.
Yeah.
But when perceptions matter in society, it's just a fact. But it doesn't devalue and degrade women to make this point. You're saying that you are in possession of a gift. Don't degrade it yourself.
Yes.
That's what it's, and so it's actually it's an ennoblement of women to tell them this. It's not, it doesn't devalue them one bit.
No, not at all. If anything, it's actually increasing the importance of what it is you were given by nature.
The corruption of the best is the worst of all. All that sort of stuff.
100%.
Yeah. So Mary writes, comparing our experiences, her and Lauren's, two things emerge. Firstly, that this is not a matter of the right being toxic for women, though, as Southern's story reveals, there's plenty of scope for toxicity if you misapply it. It's rather that purist ideologies, as such, map at best uneasily onto the practical realities for life for women, and especially as mothers. And secondly, that the simplifying, polarizing incentives baked into the contemporary internet are increasingly warping the ideologies of both left and right into such extreme forms that any sincere effort to apply these in real life will almost inevitably be the stuff of nightmares. Basically, the medium is the message. And so even if your message is strong, the trad ideal, it's being contorted by the way in which we spread information on the internet, which is pithy memes and insults and
it's not just that as well. It's the way people consume it as well.
Yeah.
Because one of the points I made in my video is that there are some Tradwife influencers who are very beautiful, very well put together. Their houses are clean. They're there, with a low cut top.
It's chaste OnlyFans.
But the point is, yeah, kind of, in a way, kind of. It takes on the aspect of a kind of fetish.
It's different kind of commodification.
It is it's commodification, but also it's in the way that the people receive that, because they see all these tiny, perfect, made-up snapshots of what domestic life purportedly is supposed to be. Whereas, obviously, as someone who's really living it, trust me, there's a lot more vomit involved. There's a lot more wee on the floor involved.
Yeah.
There's a lot more food on the wall involved.
Having to bribe them a Starburst to get them to use the potty for the first time.
Exactly. It's a lot more of them, a lot more screaming.
And women are very anxious about this because and I think, and maybe men are too, I possibly, but you will meet women who will say things like, "Will you be less attracted to me if I'm a bit nervous because I'm going to be a bit bigger and I'm going to be sweating and I wouldn't have put my would you still love me if I'm a worm?"
But that's what they're asking. They're asking if my fundamental physical appearance changes and I fall afoul of some kind of medical problem which can result from pregnancy, will you stick around? That's why the anxiety is there, and this is the sort of source of the wife jack meme. You can either get mad at it and be alone, or you can think that's endearing because men and women aren't the same, and so we can kind of dote on them for having these silly but understandably impulsive thoughts.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of my mother holding me just after she'd given birth to me, and obviously she looked. I mean, she's my mother. I think she looks beautiful, but she's sweating and she's got lovely red hair, but it's kind of black because of all the sweat, and she looks. And so it's never going to be completely glamorized. Like marriage is a lot. From seeing it the first time, it's a lot more like the beautiful messiness and imperfection of Rembrandt than it is these sort of hyper glossy, Tradwife aesthetic that you will encounter online, and it's more beautiful, it's more human, and people should embrace it, and people should be less judgmental as well about women not always conforming to the girl in the field churning butter. It's with perfect makeup on and perfect hairdo. This is at midday, and
but if all you see is a dozen images of that from different women, it's like, well, why isn't my wife? No, it's they're lying to you. All of Instagram, all of social media are very curated snapshots that don't really exist in reality. Don't worry about them.
Yeah, and I think the reason people took badly to this article, I sort of try and condense this down, is that Lauren, and I think she admits this herself in the article, and I think people might have skipped over this, or they read the vibe more than the content, as often happens with the internet, is that Lauren is not the best example of this necessarily, but she is a living example of it.
Yeah.
So for those who don't really know, watch Lauren's thing and also look at this. But she married a federal agent in Australia after about 4 months of talking to him, flew out, got married because she got pregnant, and started living the stay-at-home life and renounced her very lucrative and notable online commentary career, which had also incurred lots of costs because she'd been banned from the UK and put on watch lists and the like. So after he decided, and this is her account of things, of course, we can't hear this fella's side of the story, but I have no reason to believe she'd be dishonest. After he decided to put emotional pressures on her, tell her to do the total share of the housework and childcare, would walk out after arguments and not be emotionally responsive, and then also say you're a financial burden. And then when she went to visit her family in Canada, he foisted a divorce on her. She split up and became a single mother. And so people might be pointing to, well, you insufficiently vetted this man you only dated for 4 months and then got married to. And she's actually saying, like, she's totally understandable.
That's the point of this article.
Yes.
Say, look, I failed because I bought into an online ideology that actually doesn't really map very well to the real world. And it's, again, not the impulse under the ideology is wrong. It's that I had not implemented these things correctly. I mean, 4 months is a crazy short time.
Yeah. So she said, and this is Mary writing up, Southern's careful to emphasize she knows many traditionalists and happy, loving, complementary marriages. Okay, there we go. So marriage is not the problem. So I hypocrite, as much as I like him. Your tweet was wrong, mate. But she says it's a fallen world, and her community includes many women whose husbands seem to have been drawn to listicle-style gender ideology precisely because of the power it offers over women. Quote, those guys want someone they can feel, they can definitely control, who's never going to leave them, who they can do anything to. Now, some of those people will be abusive, but also some people are drawn to it, both men and women, because they want that rigidity and certainty because they had a broken home. And so the attraction is totally understandable. It just might not map onto reality.
Yes.
Apparently, there's some sort of underground railroad of some women in conservative space that had this kind of thing. I know Radfem Hitler constantly talks about this.
Does she?
Yeah, apparently she got married and had the same thing. I mean, take everything Radfem Hitler says.
Yeah. I don't know if I
mainly because it's entertaining, but point being, but what Mary finishes with, and this is your tweet, said you responded to someone saying this is not about Lauren Southern.
Yeah, it's not about Lauren.
Yeah, it's about how ideology is being constructed to try and insulate you from the worst excesses of modernity, and you may be drawn to it because you think it's the easiest way to get what you want, but it isn't necessarily the best thing for you.
You think that what it's going to do is allay the fears that you have going into the world that you're going to inhabit, but actually it just makes you more fearful, and it just makes you less able to deal with the difficulties of daily life.
Yeah, quite. And so I'll finish with this quote. The first generation to grow up online is now approaching middle age. A great many besides Lauren Southern have road-tested ideologies they developed in virtual space and are finding them inadequate to the real world's complexities, because we live a lot of our life online and we live as if online is equivalent to offline. I doubt online gender arguments will abate anytime soon. The tussle between men and women is a culture war as old as humanity itself. Men and women always need to find a way to live together, which means negotiating these ways our material interests and physical capabilities align or exist in tension. With the wider world in flux, it's hardly surprising to find ourselves here again. The challenge is finding solutions that are grounded in reality rather than abstract purist ideology. The internet's first generation of natives may be the one who bring us back down to earth. Even the erstwhile queen bee of the extremely online radical right is now a convert to living in reality. So perhaps there's hope that the rest of us in our politics will always find a way also back there in the end. And so it ends on the optimistic note of essentially, don't just live out memes, do your best to have a bit of give and take in your relationships, and we hope you get what you want.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Epoch series, this episode on Gaius Gracchus. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.